This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HORN HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on February 4th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. I am my own guest today, which I hope doesn't displease anyone terribly. And that's the way it is. That's what happens when you have your own show, right? You can do whatever you want, which is pretty befitting of the current Aquarius energy, which I'll get into in a few. But first, my usual housekeeping stuff. Please note that you can always check out my Karmic Evolution Facebook page, which is where I post pretty much weekly. In addition, on the current Astro energies, in addition to also making sure I post the bi-weekly lunations, the new and the full moons. And I also have on the Facebook page a place where you can sign up, listen to me, sign up for my Karmic Evolutions Conversations About Consciousness email newsletter. So if you're not a fan of Facebook, or you would rather receive it regularly and know that you won't miss it, you can either sign up for it on Facebook on my page. If you scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see join email list, or you can just send me an email at SHERI, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and I'll add you to the list. Plus, if you've missed any shows, you want to re-listen to an old show, just go to my website at karmicevolution.com, click on radio show on the upper right-hand corner of the banner, and scroll down and you'll find all the past recordings of my shows. And finally, to be as brief as possible today, I am still offering my 1 hour, $99 discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to those who are interested and curious about their soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime. My tagline is move from chaos to clarity and co-create your own future through astrological insight. And those of you who've been listening to the show regularly know that I believe that we all have incarnated, more than likely reincarnated. Our souls have decided to come back into this lifetime for a particular purpose, and we chose the energies into which to be born. And that means that we brought with us some of the energetic patterns from past life karma, some positive and some negative. Now, positive ones don't usually bother us very much, right? It's the negative ones that we're concerned about. So understanding our own hero's journey, why the soul decided to come back, what it decided to work on this time around. And of course, different people have different issues. It could be about relationships. It could be about careers. Could be about financial situations. Could be health situations. So if you really want to know why some of these situations are in your life now, I posit that a lot of them probably do have echoes from the karmic past. But regardless of that, we all want to at least I think, many people who gravitate towards astrology in terms of using it to grow in consciousness really want to better understand with conscious clarity what your true soul is trying to communicate so that you can grow in consciousness towards a more satisfying and happy future. So if you're interested in this reading, you can shoot me an email at, again, Sheri, that's SHERI, karmicevolution.com, and I'll get you signed up. And as I like to say, at only half the regular price, $99 for an hour, consciousness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get to this week's Astro News you can use. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Hold on one second. Thank you. So let's start with the fact that the monthly lunar cycle continues to wane this week until we hit the February 11th Aquarius New Moon, still a week away. I don't like to talk about the lunations too early because I think, we do live in the now. So I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But first I want to say that meanwhile, the last lunation, which was the January 28th Leo full moon, asked us, and still asks us, to release any attachment to those who don't honor our individual, unique, solar, divinely inspired creative gifts and talents. And any desire to be liked and accepted that requires us to hide our true light under a bushel should be under review right now. And that's especially true because Mercury's retrograde. Mercury began his retrograde on January 30th in airy, objective, rational, logical Aquarius. And this calls us to review how we relate to both ourselves, others, and those within society's groups, at least until February 20th, when he stations direct again. So the questions we want to ask ourselves is, do we see, do we understand, and do we have compassion for another's point of view? Or are we myopically stuck in our own thoughts, ideas, and opinions only? And how influenced are we by others' thoughts, ideas, and opinions? Or do we view others who may think differently or not agree with us with curiosity or with fear, or worse yet, hate? So today we have the third quarter waning square of the Scorpio moon to the Aquarius sun, which brings these issues to the forefront, especially as Congress debates who should be part of what group. Do we ostracize or try to control those who we feel don't belong? And if so, why? And where do we draw the line in terms of free speech? These are the kinds of energies coming to the forefront in the collective now as we see the conglomeration of Aquarius energy forming with the Sun, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury all in this airy fixed sign right now. So as we watch consciously during the Mercury retrograde period for the usual miscommunication and misinformation, and try to pay attention to the usual pitfalls of, not signing contracts, buying expensive luxury items like houses or cars, or even electronics, because electronics are, connected to Aquarius. And we watch as our smaller electronic devices get lost, break, fall in the toilet, or otherwise fail us during this period. I laugh because that's happened to me. I hate to say it, but more than once. We see that Mercury will connect with all of these planets, except for Saturn, as he traverses backwards from 26 to 11 degrees Aquarius before stationing direct once again on February 20th. And as he does so, it pays to remember that here Mercury the messenger acts as the psychopomp, delivering messages back and forth between our rational, real-world conscious ego and the less conscious portions of our psyche. So Mercury retrograde periods are always place our rational, ego-oriented, empirical left brain on hold to allow our less clear, more vague, but more visual, intuitive, spiritual, and symbolically inclined right brain to dominate or come to the forefront. In essence, Mercury retrograde periods ask us to rely more on intuitional processes and to embed our ability to do so into our consciousness rather than sticking solely to an only if I see it do I believe it mentality. Sorry, that was channeling New Yorkers, which is where I grew up. I could diss my own, as they say, right? um, in this way, when we do this, when we allow Mercury to fulfill his archetypal mythological function, which is essentially to take the wisdom that is already buried in our subconscious as part of our, it's part of our soul's wisdom about which we're not conscious, to bring those things up into the egoic empirical portion of our consciousness, which we usually label our ego, right? That we are simultaneously taking information that we've learned consciously, that which we've taught, experienced, we've been taught, we've experienced with our own eyes, so whether it's book learning or street smarts or whatever, that these two things go back and forth. We take what we've learned empirically from the outside world, embedded into the subconscious or the portion of the psyche that's related to our soul as wisdom. And we also bring the wisdom of the ages, if we're assuming that we've been around a couple times before, that's buried in the subconscious portion of the psyche, the soul's psyche, up and into consciousness. It's like I don't know, I'm seeing like one of those cartoons where an elevator's going up while another one's going down, right? So these things are happening simultaneously, and what happens then is the left brain gets completely discombobulated. So it's like, oh, did I have an appointment? Oh, damn. I forgot to check my calendar. I read it really quickly. This is a particular problem for me. I'll read something really quickly and focus on one part of it. And then it'll be like, oh, I got the gist of it wrong because now I'm talking to the person and they're like, that's not what I said. And I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. Let me go back and reread it, right? We do things too quickly. But in any case, and all these whole host of things that most astrologers are always warning us against, I don't take Mercury retrograde that seriously because of that, because as they say, it's not what happens during Mercury retrograde, it's how we handle it that really counts. So I choose to prefer to emphasize the fact that it's time to review all things Mercury when Mercury retrogrades, but now because he's going through an air sign and will continue his pattern of air sign retrogrades throughout the year, that he will give us the ability to cast a definitive eye towards how we communicate within our relationships, how we relate to each other, as well as how we relate to those from groups of which we are not members. Are they enemies, or do they simply think or look or act differently from us? Now, the focus of this review should be on the themes of the house or houses through which Mercury retrogrades now. So look for the house cusp with Aquarius on it in your chart, and you'll be able to tell, or houses, sometimes there's two, you'll be able to tell what area of life is under review. And you look at the degrees 26 to 11, that Mercury will be moving backwards over, and then once he stations forward over again, you'll see if they represent any specific sensitive points in your chart, major planets are there, or angles are there, or asteroids that you follow are there, or anything like that, or part of fortune, or stuff. So depending on how fluent you are with your chart or astro speak, you'll begin to get a feel for a theme. So the Aquarian archetype, which often gets billed by us astrologers as being simply semantically about friends, groups, and associations, and hopes, wishes, or dreams, which I think comes across many times as rather vague, has, like all zodiacal archetypes, a range of potential manifestations. For example, the concept united we stand, divided we fall is Aquarian in nature, and it would seem to me that the logical follow-up to this is that it's also Aquarian to agree that society must sacrifice the few for the many. United we stand, divided we fall. We're here, for, as a member of society, and if some of us don't make it, so be it. I mean, this is a relevant argument right now for many. So I'm going to get into that in a second. But what this doesn't take into account, however, as the last Leo moon pointed out, is Leo full moon, is the value of the few or the individuals within society's larger framework. So issues right now with all this Aquarian or Aquarius energy combining in the sky center, we can tell through the collective, and again, many of you who are regular listeners know I use politics and other things going on in the world as the example of the reflection of the energies of the heavens into the collective, and from that we can filter them down into our private lives to see which things we are most concerned about at any particular point, probably because the energies are hitting sensitive points in our own individual charts. So again, issues right now with all this Aquarian energy center on coronavirus vaccines and the argument about whether one should take it or not, out of fear that it could kill a few people, despite knowing that it could save millions. And that's not even mentioning whether there's equity in the distribution of potentially life-saving vaccines to communities of color, many of whose inhabitants prefer not to be guinea pigs. Nor does it mention the number of those who've crossed over due to getting sick from the virus. So in other words, they're the few also. Unfortunately, in the United States, their numbers are way too large, but as a percentage, a statistical percentage of the overall population, the number is small. So, it's an either or, right? Do I not take the vaccine because it could kill me because I'm one in a million, or am I one in a million who is getting sick from it because we don't have a vaccine to take or it's not available? So this question of whether one is society oriented and willing to sacrifice individual rights, not to mention safety, for the benefit of the many is not an easy one. And each of us must decide for ourselves where we fall on the spectrum, regardless of whether the topic is today's coronavirus vaccines or anything else. We know they're anti-vaxxers from way back. So, it's not just that, but right now this is what's in the collective. So are the few those, like I said, who've died as the result of the virus, or those who may die from the vaccine designed to prevent the virus? Our individual answers may lie with doing the math, something which Aquarius energy also represents. And even that can come down to doing the math in our particular areas. We all live in different parts of the country. We all live in different countries around the world. And what are the statistics in your, in your nation, in your state, in your community, in your county, in your community, all that stuff. Now, the echoes of this predominant Aquarian energy in the sky right now reflect back to us through our political landscapes as well. And before I even get to the US, let's just note that there was a coup in Myanmar the other day, whereby the military took over the supposedly democratically run state, and that recent articles have surfaced about a resurgence of the Arab Spring rebellion in the Middle East. So Aquarius energy, rebellion against the old regime. And then, of course, there's political dissident Alexei Navalny returning from exile to Russia, where he was promptly jailed. And I understand from listening to some people talk about it that he returned to Russia of his own volition, knowing he'd be jailed, because he'd already built a huge following there who opposed the corrupt governmental regime ruled over by Vladimir Putin. So street protests, along with police crackdowns, proliferate there even as we speak. Now, of course, in the United States, there's also civil rights and social justice issues at the forefront again now, since they were first sparked and galvanized by Black Lives Matter protesters and others after the murder of George Floyd, which occurred, we should remember, on May 25th, which was after Saturn first entered Aquarius in late March, and where he remained until July 1st of 2020. The other interesting thing to me, which I may or may not have mentioned on this show before, is the cracks beginning to show between the autonomy of states versus the federal government. And again, that's here in the US. Where that may be happening worldwide, I don't know. I mean, you know, Myanmar and Arab countries, you know, may be representative of this as well, and others I don't even know about. But I just saw an article this morning in The Intercept outlining how a number of state legislatures, in the wake of the U.S. Capitol riot, which remember was when Mars joined Uranus in Taurus. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. In the wake of the U.S. Capitol riot, state legislatures have introduced bills to curtail the right of American citizens to gather in groups to protest, which is part of our First Amendment constitutional right. For example, one bill in Mississippi would make it a crime punishable by 3 years in prison for any group of 6 or more who disturb, quote, any person in the enjoyment of a legal right. Secondly, there is a Florida bill which blocks civil damages for people harmed as part of protest actions. For example, if someone is injured by a car that drives into a demonstration. So I'll remind everybody too of the name Heather Heyer, who was killed when the guy mowed her down with his car when she was protesting with a group of people. It wasn't in Florida, but I'm trying to remember where it was. But this Florida bill would make people unable to sue for civil damages. And The Intercept notes a draconian Indiana law that would impose a minimum 3-day jail sentence for any group of 3 or more people who obstruct a government function by, for instance, organizing a sit-in or marching in the streets. Now, I don't think I have to tell anyone that peaceful protest is protected by the U.S. Constitution. So here we have a state that is trying to circumvent the Constitution. I believe that as we approach the Pluto return in the U.S. Sibley chart at 27 Capricorn, that we're seeing a recurrence of a lot of the energies that occurred originally when the U.S. colonies decided to band together to fight for freedom from tyranny from the British. So back then, and I've said this before already, you know, they were small groups that banded together for a large cause, but it took an awful lot for them to actually agree once the independence was won, whether and how they would stay united as one larger group. And I think we're seeing a revisiting of that on a very large scale, especially over the last 4 years. And probably have mentioned before 2 things. One of the first things that raised an alarm bell in my mind was the federal government trying to take punitive actions against sanctuary cities. So after imposition of heavy punishment for asylum seekers trying to come across the U.S. border, particularly obviously from Mexico, people were unable to apply for the asylum, which was their legal right to do under the law, and how the sanctuary cities sprang up in more liberal cities like New York, across the country, to be able to house immigrants here illegally to protect them from deportation. All right, so you guys probably know all that, and I don't mean to belabor it, but let's switch back to the current day. Today, we watched the Democrats in the House of Representatives decide, and I've been trying to keep track of when this vote is actually occurring, and all I see is that people are, blah, blah, blah on the House floor. If it will defy the Republican minority leader's reluctance of his party to censure newly elected QAnon conspiracy theorist Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, I feel like her name is a mouthful, and take action through a vote on its own. Clearly, the GOP decided yesterday to keep Representative Liz Cheney, one of the only 10 Republicans, House Republicans, who voted to impeach President Trump, in the fold. So here we see Saturn in Aquarius committing itself, Saturn's commitment, to allowing one of the staunchest, most traditional, Saturn again, conservative, Saturn again, of the old GOP group to remain in the group. All right. So again, see the split? Now, with Mercury transiting retrograde in Aquarius, Mercury's duality, Aquarius is groups. So without getting into the weeds of the ideological argument about who's right and who's wrong, I'd simply remind everyone that Aquarius, usually an open-minded, forward-thinking, humanitarian-oriented archetype, does have a shadow side. And that shadow side, in addition to any negative fallout in beliefs about sacrificing the few for the many, which I talked about, revolves around becoming so fixed in one's beliefs that it will not budge. And that's called an ideologue. So as we watch these kinds of events unfold, Aquarian energy clearly rules the heavens now, and at least will do, at least until the sun moves into Pisces on February 18th, and Venus leaves Aquarius February 25th. Mercury, meanwhile, ends his retrograde February 20th, but remains in Aquarius all the way until March 15th. So we see the review of where, on a more personal level, we can examine several things. How much freedom we believe we should each have in relation to how much we must sacrifice for the sake of the larger group or society, and that's united we stand, remember? And how we differ in our, how much we defer to our colder, more rational, objective, ideological beliefs without becoming fixatedly inflexible about them. So, in other words, double-edged swords to be rational, right? You can be too rational or not rational enough. So these questions apply to our personal relationships too, as we review how we relate to those with whom we choose to partner, how much freedom we want or allow in our relationships, and where we may be overly detached or aloof, or the opposite. So it's a tricky dance between freedom and commitment. And the basic thing to remember is that no matter what happens during Mercury's retrograde period, as I said before, it's how we handle it that counts in the end. So now is the time to consciously remember not to focus only on the snafus that occur between now and February 20th, or even until Mercury leaves what's known as its shadow period, which is when it arrives again at the degree at which it originally stationed retrograde, which was 27 Aquarius on March 13th. Rather, it's about the bigger picture of parsing out logically and rationally how we feel about our membership in any particular group, whether we believe that as a member of society, sacrifice is necessary, and whether it's time to introduce new perspectives into the discussion about how we all relate to each other on this planet. Now, this brings up another point that's been seriously bugging me for the past 4 years, which is the vitriolic name calling. Every time I watch the news, pick up the newspaper, whatever, hear people speak online, I I recognize the nastiness, the stereotyping, and the vitriol in the language. And, clearly a lot of that has had freer reign in our environment since President Trump became the leader of the land. And it's my hope that we can tone that down. I feel like sometimes saying to whoever it is that's making a statement, all right, chill, stop. Can you say that again without using this word, that word, and the other word? Can you make your thoughts coherent and clear? Make your point without, calling someone an SOB or a blood-sucking vampire or whatever, I have trouble coming up with terms without using the words Democrat or Republican, but I'll leave it to all of you to get what I'm saying. And all I have to say is it's got to stop, or we're doomed to live on an us versus them planet forever. And that just doesn't sound peaceful or conducive to more nurturing communication as we move forward, at least not to me. So when the inner planets have moved on from Aquarius, we'll be left with only Jupiter and Saturn there, at least until Jupiter begins its retrograde period on June 20th. But that's not going to happen until way after next week's February 11th Aquarius New Moon, which occurs at 23 degrees, 17 minutes of this humanitarian-oriented sign. And first, we'll see Venus conjoined with Saturn in Aquarius on February 6th or 5th or 6th, depending on your time zone, followed by Venus sextile to wounded healer Chiron in Aries, and Venus is square to Uranus in Taurus, February 6th. So I wrote in my this week's newsletter and blog that now is the time to get real about our relationships, and that we may become committed or more committed to healing them through a rapid shift in loyalties towards who and what we value on a more practical level going forward. I mean, to emphasize the point I was just making, how practical is it to find allies if you're just standing there hurling vitriol at them? The chasm and the divide only deepens that way, right? You get more flies with honey than with vinegar. It's like, do you have a point? Because if you don't have a point, then maybe that's why you're resulting to simply insults. If your point is well-founded, then shut up and make it. Anyway, or shut up with the vitriol. I think yesterday's House GOP vote sums this up well, as well as whatever will be the outcome of today's Democratic House vote on Representative Green in the end. And here's what I wrote that I put out on Monday. Remember, Venus rules Taurus, the sign through which Uranus has been transiting. Therefore, as Venus entered Aquarius, which it did on February 1st, the sign ruled by Uranus, we have a mutual reception, that's the term that astrologers use, between these two planetary energies right now that creates the potential for greater communication between the two. Likewise, Saturn rules Aquarius traditionally, as well as his rulership of Capricorn, rendering this Venus-Saturn conjunction one that relates to reviewing our relationships through a more grounded sense of reality rather than a purely romantic one. Who and to what we relate is based on that which we believe adds value to our lives. This Venus-Saturn conjunction that we're on the doorstep of paves the way for understanding that romance and attraction are all well and good, but successful long-term relationships are usually based on a shared commitment to the same or at least similar values and ethics. Now, Venus in Aquarius sextile Chiron in Aries permits opportunities for us to value engaging in the rational, logical relating necessary to heal the wounds of society as a whole. Now, Venus represents value, and value is determined both by what gives us pleasure and by ensuring greater security around our resources, which include, of course, money and possessions. So money is normally earned through work. I mean, it's also earned through inheritance, but it's usually, through work, gained through investments in land, and therein lies a great deal of inheritance, right? Possessions, financial markets, and our relationships. So the opportunity arises now to allow those suffering, Chiron and Aries, to have a voice in how the government's legislative body, which is Aquarius, supports them financially, Venus and Taurus, during a crisis, Uranus Aquarius, not of their own making. Venus square Uranus, and here again, we recognize mutual reception despite the fact that a square is a frictional aspect, which calls for a resolution. Venus square Uranus tells us that if change has been long overdue, now is the time, like it or not. Any rapid or even fleeting, because Uranus is fast moving, I'm sorry, not Uranus, Venus is fast moving, any rapid or even fleeting change in how elected officials perceive the current financial plight of their own constituents may be deemed to fall under the larger, albeit much slower, astrological framework of the Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn cycle that kicked off last January 12th. Now, the reason I mention that is because it started a new 35 or so year cycle, and the old one is coming to an end, or came to an end. That's particularly prevalent because the last Saturn-Pluto cycle, which began in late 1982 and early 83, for those of us who were alive then, was in Libra. And one of the things it gave birth to was the financial philosophy. Pluto is always about wealth and hidden inner resources. And Saturn, of course, is about foundation and tradition. One of the philosophies that was heavily embraced, particularly by the Reagan administration, was that of small government, and the belief that if we reduce taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals, that money would trickle down to those in poverty and lift them out of poverty and into the middle classes. Now that this new Saturn-Pluto cycle has begun in Capricorn as of a year ago, we have conclusively found, and even Alan Greenspan, the economist who pretty much hawked the economic philosophy called starve the beast, meaning the beast is big government, that it was a failure. So, I think it's interesting to note all of the stuff going on in the short term that's really at the very beginning of this long cycle that will give us a totally different themes going forward and a new foundational themes, right? Particularly around, as I said, Saturn, which is stability and foundation and sticking to what we know and tradition, and Pluto, which is about wealth, if we're looking at it in those terms right now, but it's our inner resources. Now, on February 8th, the Sun meets Mercury retrograde, and that's when a legislative group of serious personages, as my advanced placement high school English teacher used to say, will meet yet again, redieu, Sun meets Mercury retrograde again, to decide whether or not to oust a member from its ranks permanently. Yet February 8th is also the day the Senate is supposed to bring the second trial to decide whether or not to convict Donald Trump. I'm sorry, I'm making reference to the same person here. I realize that's confusing. On February 8th, right now, the Senate is scheduled to begin the second Mercury retrograde, meeting the Sun, trial to decide whether or not to convict Donald Trump, despite the fact that he's no longer in office now. I'll mention here, too, that precedent has been set that this is allowed. So arguments to the contrary are actually not true according to most legal constitutional scholars. You can impeach someone once they're out of office, in other words. Saturn sextiles Chiron February 9th, and we see his journey follows that of Venus. So whether there's a commitment to alleviate the pain and suffering of those less fortunate in some way remains to be seen. When Mercury squares Mars in Taurus February 10th, we've got a recipe for disagreements. It's often related to irritability, and that leads to arguments. But we may also be called to defend Mars, our ideas, Mercury now, and this seems like it's perfect energy for the second or third day of a trial, at least if you ask me, at least if things do go according to schedule, which remains to be seen. So prior to the Aquarius New Moon, which occurs February 11th at 11:05 a.m. Pacific time and 2:05 p.m. Eastern time, Venus meets up with Jupiter, both of them in Aquarius. Optimism around finances may occur or endure as Venus, traditionally known as the lesser benefic, passes over Jupiter, traditionally known as the greater benefic. I do wonder if there will be the passage of President Biden's $1.9 trillion budget on or around then. I mean, who knows? However, on the more personal level, this energy bodes well, at least again, fleetingly, for love relationships, general optimism, and warmth in relating. So, if Mercury squares Mars on the 10th, and on the 11th, Venus meets Jupiter, there's the possibility of a recipe where arguments might clear the air enough to be able to allow us to talk, and talk more objectively. And so that would be my hope anyway, because, if arguments don't clear the air and open up a space for dialogue, then they really serve little purpose, right? Except to, again, throw vitriol at each other. The only caution with Jupiter, with Venus meeting Jupiter, is that we might become a little overly self-indulgent. But, hey, there's a freaking pandemic going on now. So what's a little self-indulgence? Order in, cook a delicious meal, have some forbidden foods, get a group together on Zoom, raise your glasses, open some champagne, binge watch a series show, whatever, whatever floats your boat. But the vibes should be at least more positive than negative as we lead up to the Aquarius New Moon energy. And Mercury waxes towards meeting Venus too, which happens the following day at this time on the 12th of February. So discussions about what's of value and what's not may well be had now, especially as the collective confusion caused by the transiting nodal axis's recent square to Neptune begins to wane. I spoke about that over the last couple of shows, so hopefully you know what I'm talking about. But at this lunation, Neptune actually opposes Vesta, which is an asteroid, one of the goddess asteroids, who's known as the keeper and protector of the hearth fire. And Vesta also squares the nodal axis at this time. So Vesta represents that which we hold dear because it provides us security. I mean, there's other stuff that she represents, but I'm focusing on this because I feel it's most prevalent for right now. And what provides us security is stuff like written wills, deeds, titles like vehicle titles, Social Security applications, expensive jewelry, whatever you put into a safety deposit box for long-term safekeeping, keys to, buried treasure. I don't know, I mean, keys to other safety deposit boxes that have other expensive items in them. All these come under Vesta's domain. So in Virgo, because she's opposite Neptune in Pisces, she'd also be about being of service. So this opposition, technically square the nodes, may spell out our insecurity right now about getting clear on how or whether to empathize with those more needy during this pandemic as it continues to play out or not. It's interesting to note that one of the issues under discussion right now concerning pandemic relief to the masses is lowering the eligibility to those with incomes over $50,000 a year, because certain studies have shown those receiving payments from the government who make last year, who make that salary or above, put them in the bank rather than spending them. So in other words, not everyone needs them to survive right now, so why should they get such payments? I'm not arguing either way, but I'm just saying stay tuned as the battle continues. Finally, there's Saturn square Uranus on February 17th, which kicks off this cycle of 3 squares during 2021. I've already mentioned that I believe, though this energy is a rebellious one, that it's also indicative that the center will hold. And that's because, and I've already again talked about this, Saturn mythologically fought his father Uranus and essentially won. He in the myth, he castrates Uranus, throws his genitals into the sea, and from them a rise of foam that gives life to Aphrodite or Venus, the goddess of love. So it's sort of an indication that change is necessary because it helps us continue fertility. Right? If we don't change, we ossify, we fossilize, and if you do that, and this is where, you know, Aquarius energy comes in right now, if we're stuck in an old ideology, and again, I may have said this before too, I'm of the age where a lot of my friends, coworkers, you know, relatives, whatever, are stuck in this starve the beast philosophy, this government deficit is bad, welfare is bad, and that's from 40 years ago. So they don't seem to recognize that things might actually have changed. So it's ironic in a way, because Saturn likes to rely on the past and tradition, but he's the one who fights to move forward to replace his father Uranus as essentially the king, right? So there's a lot of ironic dynamics inherent in this square when we look at it from an archetypal point of view. But I think it's an interesting one. And looking also at where the square will occur, which will happen for the first time on February 17th. Hang on, let me see if I can get you the other dates. I should have them here. I've forgotten. I think, oh, here, February 17th, June 14th, and again at the end of the year, December 24th. So this whole period, which essentially encompasses from now until the end of the year, is, you know, potentially a battle between where, excuse me, where to stay the same and where to change. And, you know, the more that we've resisted change, the more that change is likely to come, but to come in an upsetting, shocking, you know, not delightfully surprising way. Those of us who are more in alignment with change on a regular basis in our lives, because some of us are just more built that way energetically, this might not be a seriously hampering period. But for the others of us who have, you know, a lot of Taurus energy, fixed energy, Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, might not be so happy. But, you know, if you've been putting up with unpleasant conditions, and again, I hark back to all the Aquarius energy now, which is the precursor to this, where is the mindset fixed? Where does the mind, in alignment with the transiting nodal axis, which still has a south node in Sagittarius, which is our belief system, right? Aquarius is our ideological belief system, or our fixed set of beliefs, right? Sagittarius is like, you know, don't talk to me, I know everything. And Aquarius is like, well, my ideas and opinions have hardened to the point where I can't ever change them. And the antidote, of course, is to go for the North Node in Gemini, which says, let new information in. And because Uranus is connected, rules Aquarius. Aquarius is connected to revelations through new perspectives. The universe is saying to us during this Saturn square Uranus period that spans the better part of this year, where are we too entrenched in the old ways of thinking, and where can we let in new information that leads to new perspectives that on their own lead to aha moments and other revelations that allow us to, instead of reject, embrace change. Because again, one more time, not only with Mercury retrograde, but when we're looking at astrological energies as they affect our own personal charts and our own personal lives, it's not always about what happens, it's about how we handle it going forward. And in handling it going forward, we have choices, and those choices may allow us to change our karma. And that in turn allows us to co-create our own future rather than to claim to be a victim of the past. So, if we remember that change can be creative, change can, the devil that you don't know might actually not be worse than the one that you do know, is something we should keep in the forefront of our imaginations and our conscious brains. So again, the less conscious one is that change is becoming necessary in one's life, the more likely that change will be sudden, shocking, and unpleasant. But it doesn't guarantee that. And even if it is shockingly unpleasant, it doesn't mean that we can't recover from it, in the sense that we can use whatever changes have occurred that we feel are beyond our control to look at the future and make the changes necessary in the areas, the houses where Saturn is going to be transiting from, and Uranus, the house that Uranus is transiting, through, to see which areas of life are particularly impacted now. Saturn will be in Aquarius, so you want to look to the house that has Aquarius in it, and Uranus is transiting through Taurus, so you want to look to the house that has Taurus energy in it, and you'll be able to see. And given that Uranus is in Taurus is about changing our values, and Saturn in Aquarius is about growing a stronger foundation for ourselves through our choices about where we ally ourselves with our friends, with our significant others, with our colleagues, and with society in general, so that we can rectify where we need to make the change to be more in sync with the changing values, right? To really go deep and say, hey, well, if I've been alive since the 1980s, I was an adult then, let's just say. I know some people younger might not be able to relate to this, but I know there's a good deal of others who will. So, I developed certain mindsets based on what was going on in the collective and society at the time. 10As and philosophies, they don't only have to be political. They could also be religious. They could be, work-related, relationship-related, whatever. But if you actually allow yourself to go back to that time and think about where your ideas and your mindset subsequently concretized, and to see now whether that concretization of thought matches the world today with all the changes that's come about. One of the things that's I'm focusing on is I grew up with a majority of Catholics, and how things have changed vis-a-vis the issue, say, of abortion. Just to throw something random out there, how attitudes have changed towards the LGBTQ population. We just swore in yesterday, I think it was, Kamala Harris, the vice president, swore in Pete Buttigieg. Love him or hate him, as our new transportation secretary. What love him or hate him, he's a homosexual man married to a man, you know? So clearly society is moving in a certain direction. The question is whether you want to go with the flow or whether you want to stand sentinel and say, you know, halt, I don't think so. I don't like the direction things are going in. I think we should go back 100 years. You know, that's up to each of us to decide for ourselves. So I am going to end now and to thank everyone for listening to my long soliloquy and all of my remarks. I truly appreciate all of you as listeners and supporters of Karmic Evolution. So thank you again, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on February 11th. You'll be pleased to know I will have a guest, as that's when I'll welcome back professional astrologer Joseph Adeo. Until then, we'll probably talk about, because that day is the day of the Aquarius lunation, the new moon. I will have that out on Facebook and in my newsletter, hopefully prior to the actual lunation, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk about that and probably Mercury retrograde and the upcoming Saturn square Uranus. I'll get his take on that. But till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free